You ready to rock?
Oh yeah, man.
Just white dad things to say before we get in the car. You guys ready to rock?
And that's what I texted you, right? I was like, ready to rock, big dog.
That's what's
Turned into a white dad. I got no kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's boogie and let's get ready to rumble.
Let's rock and roll. Yeah. Welcome to the Dylan and Joe Basement Podcast. We're your hosts, Dylan.
And I'm little tiny Joe, and I'm so happy to be talking to you all again today. This is a great subject for us today.
Joe, what are we going to talk about today?
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell at least 2 hours about talking about abnormally sized humans. Your dad. Well, we're talking about the reason why you're dressed up in your early Judah warrior wear. If you can take a good look at the guy, he's dressed as David because we're going to be talking about giants today.
Does early Judah warrior wear have its own section on eBay, or is this?
Yep, it's right next to fetish wear and cosplay.
Yeah, weirdly enough, this has a zipper around the crotch, so if to get
easy access,
my pants off easier. Yeah, it's there. Just kidding. I actually lost the pants. I'm wearing regular human pants, but top's pretty sharp. It's pretty sniffy here. Looking pretty strong.
Look at that. Oh man.
Look at quarantine lounging muscles, just chilling. And
what a beast. David is not depicted as nearly as shredded as you are. You would give him a run for his money.
I don't know. I feel like a David in life. It's underestimated but small.
Yeah, is it because of the time where you were staring at your neighbor and they were taking a bath and you went over and fucked her? That's a good David story.
Did David
for another
do that?
podcast? Yeah, Bathsheba. Her name was literally Bathsheba. It's like, okay, try a little harder. She's taking a bath. You named her Bathsheba. But that's her name. Yeah,
That's
he was married
crazy.
at the time and so was she. But, it's all good. The Old Testament shit, God is like, it's all good, man. They don't really care about all that. As long as you win. Well, the thing is that he didn't just cheat and have her cheat on her husband. He cheated. He actually sent her husband away to war so he'd be killed in the front lines. And then it worked. And then he could bang his wife. It was like pretty cool. And that's the father of Judah. That's the king that all of it's based on. All the Judaism. Like, that's our guy, David. We'll get to him, though.
Classic ancient move of the masculine side of dating. Send the guy off to war, get him killed, date his wife.
The ends justify the means in the ancient world. It's
kind of like Pearl Harbor.
It's hard to judge
in a way, is it? Or kind of Pearl Harbor move type of thing.
Yeah, that kind of thing, like the movie. Yeah. For sure that. Actually, that's actually right. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about giants.
So Joe, I think let's take a look at some famous giants throughout history. And you already mentioned one of them. We got David and Goliath. I'm going to have you start with this. It sounds like you know more about the mythology and possibly not even mythology. This could be just true stories. We're not sure. We're here to tell you what we might think that might be. Exactly
right. We're gonna preach the news, and then we're all gonna decide on it together. So that's a good point. The first thing I think of usually when I think of giants is Goliath. Growing up and learning all the Bible stories and things like that. So this is actually from the book of Samuel, part of the Old Testament. A big part of the Old Testament is all describing to you how the Israelites are the chosen people and how they're God's people and all that. And David in the story goes on to become the first king of Judah. So that's the first actual, state or whatever nation you'd say that the Jews built after their exodus and all that. So this is where Dylan's point gets a little, salient here, because there is pieces of reality in the story. I mean, there's many tribes that were fighting at that time around that area. One of them is, the Jews. And one of them is the Philistines. And the Philistines is another large army from around the area. They come stomping on their territory, trying to take over. And there's a million stories about, the Jewish warriors and the Philistine warriors going to battle with each other. Just insane, ancient warfare shit. Just kill everybody, rape everybody, all the goods. But the difference is God is on their side. So it's okay. So The problem that they're having is that there is a fierce warrior on the side of the Philistines, and they call him Goliath. That's his name. He's a giant of a man. Quite literally, he is a giant. He's supposed to be, twice the size of any other man, and he couldn't be defeated by any soldier. He was just taking people out left and right, hacking them to pieces. So there's no, statistics in the Bible about how big Goliath is.
There is.
Is there? Oh, is there really?
Apparently,
I thought it was just allegory. Yeah. So go ahead.
In 1 Sam chapter 17 verse 4, he's
Samuel.
He's 10'6", and this is in 1010 BC.
Thank you. That's good. 10'6". So that must have been obviously corrected afterwards. Obviously, they didn't measure things in imperial feet at the time.
Took out the tape measure. 10'6".
Yeah, they didn't even say feet. They said like how many stone tall are you, whatever, or heavy were you, whatever.
Stone. Yeah.
But anyways, he's 12 hands high. Anyway, so the guy was huge, big enough that now we use that name as a synonym for giant. This man was a Goliath. Like they just use that name as means you're huge, So yeah, he's a big old Philistine. And there's this little guy, David, who fights in the army for Judah. And he's such a tiny little guy, and he's a shepherd, I believe, but he wants to, fight the good fight. He goes into battle with a sling, which when I was a kid, I thought that was amazing. It reminded me of like going like Bart Simpson with a slingshot to go defeat your enemies. It's a super cool kid weapon. But a sling was a little bit different than a slingshot because it happens to be not elastic like a slingshot. You're taking a solid piece of ribbon-like material like canvas, and you're creating the centrifugal force when you're hatting that around your head. If you throw it just right, you add so much speed to it that you're throwing a projectile that can really hurt people. I mean, it's fun, in the Bible stories, like you're going to throw a rock and kill somebody. They don't want to hear the story about how David cut Goliath's head off slowly with a butter knife. It would be kind of more gruesome and less heroic. It's just, he shot him with the arrow or he threw a rock at him. But those slings are the real deal. In ancient warfare, people use those things. People were killed with them quite often. In places that weren't as apt to build bows and arrows, slings are the earliest way to do it. Throwing a rock with your arm is not nearly as powerful as using a sling to whip it around, hit someone in the face. They actually did work. So as the story goes, that just adds more to the factual nature of there perhaps was a young soldier who proved his mettle by, killing an abnormally large man with a sling. It very well could have.
It's also kind of funny too, like just to think, like imagine like you're nervous, you're running into battle and you're just charging, and say it doesn't kill you, you just get hit in the chest with a fucking rock, and you're like,
oh, it's
oh, god damn it! Like
every time you
knocks
breathe,
the wind out of you, and you're just like, it's because it's so primitive. Warfare is the most gruesome of it all, quite frankly. And it's
there's no efficiency at all. It's just all brutality, no efficiency. Just
nothing. Yeah, you hear about like soldiers in modern day. Sometimes they have to pick up something in the room and kill someone with it because they ran out of ammo, or whatever it is. But back then, that's what it was. It was
that was how
rocks.
You kill people. Yeah,
rocks. You kill them with rocks. Like take a rock and smash the guy's head in, or get slung in the chest by a rock and then just get knocked over, and then someone cuts your head off. Like that's
you don't even die. They slowly tear you to pieces. Like
from the outside you look fine, but the inside all your internal organs are just smashed, and you're just like
bloated mess. On
45 minutes before you die. It just sounds really bad. Like I said, it's funny if it didn't hurt you bad enough. It would just be like a real like wrench in your spokes.
To be
to be a little bit futuristic, a couple of wrenches in the spokes.
Couple twigs in your spokes here. He goes on, he defeats Goliath. He goes on to be the king of Judah, and he meets Bathsheba and all the cute stuff, which eventually leads as an insane part of the Bible that they go on a genealogy trip. It's like 2 chapters where they just say names of men until they reach Joseph, who is the father on earth of Jesus. It's very strange, but it's part of the story. Anyways, as we might think for most subjects we cover on this podcast, it's not an isolated incident. Much like anything else we talked about, these things are going on all over the world. All different cultures have their ideas of them. And that's another fascinating thing about the shit we talk about, is that it's never or almost never an isolated thing. It happens all over the world, and oftentimes independent of each other. Someone in Japan who's believing in giants, which was happening at the time, didn't talk to someone who was living in Judah at the time, but they still were both telling tales of giants, giant people. For example, there's Balor, the one-eyed god of death. Now that's from Irish mythology. Balor was the king of a tribe of giants that had said to have, colonized Ireland in the early parts of the world, like in the ancient times. The giants are the older people. This guy had one eye. Might remind you of another giant that might come up later.
Iborgs.
Iborgs.
Make sure you pull up a picture of the front cover of Iborgs.
Oh yeah, Iborgs is worth watching.
If we can bring that up in any context, we will. Anyways, move on.
Yep. So he had one eye, and if you ever caught his gaze, you die instantly. So they call him the god of death. So if you ever even saw him, you would be dead. It kind of sounds like cheating to me. But the one eye thing reminded me of another famous giant, which these creatures are very closely associated with giants. The only difference is usually the number of eyeballs in their heads, and that's a cyclops. The cyclops is a giant human with one eye. Sometimes they'll add a horn or something, but the major idea is it's just a giant person. And the most famous of which has to be Polyphemus. That's from the Odyssey, that great Greek story with Odysseus. That giant traps them in a cave, and they have to defeat it by fashioning a spear out of a thing of wood, and lighting on a fire, poking them in the eye, little eye poke. So again, we're in Greece, we're in Ireland, we're in the Middle East. They're all having stories about giants. One of my favorite ones, though, is the mythology that has the most giants for sure. They're giant heavy. Giants are a huge part of the mythology, and that's brought up slightly the past. Norse mythology. Norse mythology is all about giants. The Jotun. In Jotunheim, the world of giants, it always comes up. They're always fighting giants, and giants are trying to take over the world. But this is my favorite one because it involves a couple of contests when it's not as simple as slaying a giant who's this evil force like David is. And so Odin, who's the king of Asgard. So if you don't know what that is, you probably haven't watched a Marvel movie, but they don't really explain it that well. It's a little different in the comics. But he's the king of heaven, basically. Odin's the father god. He's the Zeus guy. So he's out hot to trot on his 8-legged horse, feeling like a real hot shot. And he goes to Jotunheim, the land of the giants. And he goes to one of the giants there, one of the toughest giants of all the giants. So he's already a giant, but he's the giant. This is the giants. This guy's name, I gotta make sure I read it right. It's Hrungnir, and he's one of the Jotun. So he's hanging out in Jotunheim, and Odin comes up to him in his 8-legged horse, and he goes, "I bet I could beat you in a horse race. My horse is faster than hell." And the guy goes, "You're on. You're just a stupid Asgardian. I'm a giant. You guys are a little tiny, basically looking like people." They ride their horses. The giant loses the race. Too bad. And he starts pouting, and Odin feels bad, and he goes, "You know what? I do feel bad. My horse does have 8 legs. It's way faster than your horse anyways. I want to buy you a drink. Least I can do is go buy you a drink." So they go to the local tavern in Asgard, whatever that means. I mean, being a bartender in heaven sounds like hell to me, but it is what it is. So they go there. They get a couple of horns of mead, I'm sure. And unfortunately, giants they're classic belligerent drunks. The guy starts getting off his ass. He's all aggressive, belligerent, starts talking smack to all the gods of Asgard, saying, "I could kill every last one of you people in here, and I'll spare the 2 goddesses, Freya and Sir, and I'll take them back to Jotunheim with me. Basically, I'm going to kill all you, pussies, and I'm drunk on being a giant." So they don't take too kindly to that. They give their resident ass kicker a call, and they say, "Hey, Thor, are we going to stand for this? This guy we're buying him a drink. He's talking shit about all the Asgardians." So Thor comes up and he goes, "I'll see you in a one day, and I'm going to take out the trash, as it were." So Hrungnir, none too happy about that, but he's here to prove he's going to kill all these stupid gods. Comes back for the duel. Hrungnir is wearing head-to-toe stone armor. So a giant wearing armor from head to toe, all covered up. And with him as a weapon, he's wielding a giant whetstone. So like a whetstone is what you use to sharpen a blade, right? Before we had those awesome, spinning, turning things we have now. And so he's carrying a whetstone that's like the size of like a giant blade, a giant hammer almost, as his weapon. He's like, "I'm going to crush you with a rock. I am the rock." And Thor goes and hurls his hammer, Mjolnir, towards him, smashes the whetstone to pieces, goes right into his face, dead. One-shots him, over. And as the legend goes, that whetstone cracked into millions of pieces and fell to Midgard, which is where we live on Earth. And that's what we call flint. You can start a fire with it now. It's all from the whetstone of the giant. And to round out the famous giants, I had to bring up what I would think that is even a more famous giant story, maybe than David and Goliath. Can you think of one that I missed that might be more famous?
I'm possibly thinking of some of the landmarks that you come across when you're driving to California from the East Coast. One of them is of a lumberjack. Is that who you're talking about?
You know what? You know what? I didn't think of that one. There are so many giants. He's referring to Paul Bunyan, ladies and gentlemen. Would you like to tell us the tale of Paul Bunyan?
I don't fucking know anything about Paul Bunyan. I think he's a lumberjack who
he's an American lumberjack. He's a giant.
He's an American lumberjack. Yeah. Did he have red hair by any chance?
I don't think there's anything about him having red hair, but he did have a giant blue ox. He had a giant blue ox called Babe, and he would cut down trees with one swing of his axe, his mighty axe.
Yeah, and that's definitely no red hair on that guy. I mean, he is the classic lumberjack that we find on the paper towels, if anyone's wondering.
Ronnie.
Yes. And
Paul Bunyan. I can't believe I didn't think of Paul Bunyan. Of course. Classic giant.
Yeah, he's just has like tall tales of superhuman labors and has Babe the Blue Ox.
Awesome.
Tradition.
I think he made
loggers.
Pancakes the size of a house or something. He did all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, which isn't quite as amazing as a real guy's ability with things you consume. And I don't know if you're going to talk about him because he's not a myth. He's a real dude.
No, I just have the one last famous giant from fiction, which is, I can't believe I didn't think of Paul Bunyan.
Can I guess?
Sure. You can guess again, yeah.
I can't think of anyone else.
Why did you ask to guess? You had something loaded up.
I thought if it's that easy, something has to come up. I mean, I got absolutely nothing. Not even one remote guess. Okay, go.
This is the one that first came to my head before Goliath even, and that is the giant that doesn't have a name, but it's from Jack and the Beanstalk.
Oh, yeah.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. That's what it came from my head. The giant of Jack and the Beanstalk. So I did look up the summary of Jack and the Beanstalk just to make sure I was right about the facts of it. So I wrote my version of it. But when I looked up the summary of it, I found someone's summary, and I think it'd be worth reading after mine. Just to go to show you that I actually do think for myself. I don't just copy articles online. So here's my thing of it. Jack and the Beanstalk is a story of a poor English farm boy. His family's dirt poor and they're starving, and they have one cow left. They send Jack to the market, right, to sell the cow and get food for the family. He gets swindled by someone who says, I'll sell you these magic beans for your cow. And then he comes home with the magic beans. Obviously, his family's devastated. They're all going to starve to death, all because Jack got swindled by a snake oil salesman. And Jack's a fucking idiot, and he sold his family down the river. And he's a terrible person, and he fell for shit. And you can be blamed if you get tricked, all right, people? Wake the fuck up. Anyways, he gets the magic beans, and he plants them in the ground, and these things are going to grow all the food for my family. Doesn't grow food, grows a giant beanstalk that reaches all the way up to the clouds. So Jack goes, he climbs the beanstalk. At the top of the beanstalk, there is a home, and some versions it's a house, some versions it's a castle. Jack goes ahead and does a B&E, breaks in to try to steal shit out of this person's home. He finds they have a goose that lays golden eggs. He's stealing that. Turns out it's a giant, and the giant wants to eat him. I smell the blood of an Englishman, fee, fi, fo, fum, that whole thing. So Jack takes the goose that lays the golden eggs, and he figures, now my family will have all the money we need. He climbs down the beanstalk, and as he gets to the bottom, and the giant's chasing him down the beanstalk, he chops down the beanstalk. The giant falls and crashes, and the tale is over. I don't know what the moral of the story is, besides you can go against your family's wishes, putting them in mortal danger and possibly starving to death. But it's all fine. And then you go into someone's house where they live, you steal their valuables, and then you kill them. I don't, there's no other way to put that story. I mean, it all works out for him. I feel bad that he's poor, but it's like, what the fuck is that? So I had to look up because I want to remember the end. I'm like, how does the giant die? Does he fall? So I looked it up, and this is the summary I got. I'm just going to read it as it is. And this is how I got it. So it's obviously the early part about the cow, all that. It starts as so. Jack enters the castle and sees a giant woman and asks her for food because he hasn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. The women gave Jack food, but when her child-eating husband comes home, Jack hides in the oven. Once the husband falls asleep, Jack escapes the oven, steals a bag of gold, and runs out of the house. Jack does this 2 more times, stealing a chicken that poops gold and a gold harp. The last time he travels up the beanstalk, the giant husband sees Jack and he's running out of the house with the harp and chases after him. Once Jack goes down the beanstalk, he cuts the beanstalk, and that's the end.
To kick things off with, excuse me,
You're
with
excused.
with giants that may have been on Earth. We can start with a quote from Abraham Lincoln, actually, from
Interesting.
1848. The eyes of that species of extinct giant, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. And just to kick things off with Abraham Lincoln, and we're going to go back a bunch more years to the Book of Enoch, which is one of those secret books of the Bible that were possibly intentionally left out of the Bible, but it was most recently like rediscovered.
I think certainly intentionally left out. I don't know.
Yeah, the
we
Book
can
of
get
Enoch
into
is
it, but I think it is deliberate in this record of that. But I don't know.
Exactly. I think so too. And there's a lot of reasons why they would leave out the Book of Enoch. I mean, you can come up with 100 different reasons, but it's very simply that there were in the book, which they most recently kind of rediscovered in the 40s.
Oh, we haven't mentioned that yet. When did they discover these books?
So they were part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which had a lot of other different stories in them, or books that were left out of the Bible, and books that were in the Bible. So it was like the Dead Sea Scrolls are basically another, and I think it was the Hebrew Bible, which is basically the Old Testament. It is the Old
Torah.
Testament. Yeah, so it's I forget what country in the Middle East they found these in, but some farmer went out and he discovered a cave, dug into the cave, found all these clay pots, like a lot of clay pots.
Really?
Opened them up, found scriptures in them. So those are called the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're perfectly preserved. And those were discovered in the 40s. And on those in those scriptures, which were on, I guess papyrus, is that the old ancient paper?
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Yeah, they found other books in the Old Testament that were almost identical, other books in the Old Testament that were a little bit different, and then they found books that weren't in there that they know of, like the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch can be summarized by God has what's called the Watchers, and he sent them down to Earth.
The Watchmen.
Exactly. And he called them the sons of God.
Ooh, I'm already sensing a little bit of blasphemy here. Might not want that in the Bible.
And he dispatched to Earth for the purpose of instructing and nurturing humanity in proper ritual and ethical conduct. And what did they do? They went and banged everyone. That's
classic angels, dude.
Classic angels. These guys are apparently bigger, stronger, more awesome.
They're supposed to be enormous, right? Like 3 stories tall or something, right? Like,
weirdly enough, I couldn't find anything about the Watchers themselves' height. It doesn't really mention that too much.
Yeah, from what I heard, I don't think that this is probably not written down the same way that Goliath's height is written down in modern day things. But yeah, from what I was understanding, that they were not just giant in the sense of they're like being 9 feet tall. They were like 30 feet tall, and they were like literally gigantic, the size of a building.
Yeah. So what I got is that the Watchers were just specifically called that, and their name in the book was Grigori. And so again, they had sex with everyone there, like just came down and just kind of wreaked havoc, because they're just a bunch of kids getting out, having a good time. And they impregnated a lot of people. And the children of the people they impregnated were the giants, also known as Nephilim.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So those are the big ones.
Yep, those are the big ones. And then excuse me, and then the children of those also were giants as well, and this became a big problem for the world. I'd
imagine it'd be a problem for the mother the first time it was born. Essentially, it'd be a human woman.
Very big.
I mean, people die in childbirth all the time, especially back up before history started. But I'm sure that God could probably figure that out for them. Just kind of magic it up.
Yeah, I think so. So what happened then is when Enoch, who was a prophet, so the book of Enoch, he's a prophet, he found out about the situation with everyone and is very upset, told God, and that's part of why they think maybe this book was left out of the story, is because it's the only book in the Old Testament that depicts God as having more, I guess, humility.
Yeah, like he fucked up.
Well, not well. Actually, I didn't think of that. Yes, but he also didn't really like seek punishment. He's pictured as he's pictured as more of somebody who is a little more forgiving. Where in the
Oh,
other
I see.
books, he's
I see
someone to
what
be
you mean.
feared.
So yeah, so
someone to be,
he's given him a break. In other words, where in the Old Testament, usually he's more of a scary, all powerful, watchful dad to you.
exactly. Yep. Yeah. He's designed by the book to instill fear in the people so they can behave in society in fear of God. And this is the only book that doesn't really that doesn't go into detail about that. So I think that's really a big part of why
that's a very
it was
good
left
point.
out. So this is you corrected me on this one, but this is not the first time that giants appeared in sort of historical text. But it's a good start.
But
for
yeah,
us.
like I was mentioning before we started the podcast, yeah, canonically it would be right because that's said to have been taking place like during the earliest stages of humanity, right? It wasn't happening like when Moses was hanging out. It was supposed to be like way before in the very far past, right? So as far as the story says, it would have happened before all of our other giant stories, maybe not before the one with Odin, because that's also like before humans. But it's obviously not written then, it's written well after that, but it's an early depiction of it. I think that mostly the reason why they would keep it out of there, which is definitely the reason why you said, because of that whole idea of it. But in the New Testament, God, he acts much nicer and he brings his son there and it's all nice and good. I think it has a lot to do with the angels part of it as well, because angels are depicted so oddly in the Bible, but they're always depicted as like these perfect beings that have like come from on high. And the idea of putting angels in the Bible and telling them they're going down and they're fucking it up and they're doing whatever the fuck they want. They basically got in there, they Sodom and Gomorrah themselves, or the angels in the Bible with Sodom and Gomorrah, they like were so, revolted by the place that God destroyed the entire city. But meanwhile, in the other book, the angels are doing all the sodomy and the Gomorrah-y, if that was a word. So I don't think they wanted that in there because it kind of fucks up their story. And not only the fact that, maybe it could be that God was, being a little more like, oh yeah, I fucked up this time, or like I'm being more merciful. Yeah, I just don't think it's good to have it in there with that. It just doesn't jive with the message. And that was not the only book they left out of the Bible. And in the books that they left in, they did, a lot of work to make sure it left the message. Whatever the Bible meant in the year, 1000 or 900, whenever it actually was compiled all together, all the books in one thing called the Bible, which the Bible, just the word means basically like the collection of books. It's not like actually supposed to be, this is one book about Jesus or God. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that, everyone had the full concept of it then without thinking, all right, we have to try to make this a certain way because this is kind of weird ass shit. But they kept a lot of weird shit in there too. So it's hard to say.
True. Yeah, no. Kind of from then on, there's stories about giants everywhere. Asia, more Middle East, especially you said Norse culture, big time. And to the United States.
Native Americans, there's a lot of Native American stories about giants eating people.
Native Americans are equally as important as Norse, and I'll get into that shortly, because they seem to be related.
Interesting.
But I have sort of a timeline here of like, so the thing is, giants throughout history have been widely disproved, and it came about on, I guess Reddit is really what kind of exposed this. In the mid 2000s, there were a lot of pictures of giant skulls, pictures of giant bones, pictures of all these things, and you go, well, that's clearly a giant. That head is gigantic.
Yeah, there's a good picture, I'll put it up here, of like 3 archaeologists around. There's a big human skeleton. It looks like the size of a giant. It looks very accurate, especially for early Photoshop, but ultimately that was what it was,
Yeah. Yep. So, but there's of that timeline. These are accounts of giants throughout history. So again, present day man on average, let's just say 6 feet. Some quick facts about. Really
I take resentment of that subject. The average man is 6 feet. Go fuck you.
Well, it's just So neither of us are 6 feet people. We're not.
Hey, we're average height, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say average height guys. Yeah.
I mean,
statistically, 3 out of every million people in the world are abnormally tall, which I think would be like over 6'8". So that's
Interesting.
6'8"
Okay, yeah.
and up is very
So it's
odd.
probably like you're in the top whatever
The
2 or
top.
1%. How's the weather up there? Get all our giant jokes out of the way. In the top percentile, they'd have to, define that as
Yeah.
most people who are born never reach the height of 6'8". So if you reach that, you're in a very small portion of people, which we consider abnormally tall.
And we consider gigantism, right? That's the word.
Right, but do you physically have gigantism just because of your height? I thought that had to do with the fact because you have an abnormal pituitary gland that leads to the disease that is gigantism. I think you can be
Correct.
called a giant if you're a certain height, but I don't think you have gigantism just because you reach a certain height. Like Shaquille O'Neal, for example, I don't believe he has gigantism, but he is one of the tallest people in popular culture.
That's a good point.
But I'm not sure if he has gigantism or not because I think that he's, relatively healthy. I mean, he played, in the NBA for years and he's still around with us now. I think he's going to now have a nice long life if we're lucky, as opposed to people maybe like Andre the Giant, who did have gigantism and then he died very young, relatively, because of his medical conditions. I don't know if that's hard and fast rule, but I do think that people could be declared like a giant. Like you could be declared, legally you could be declared a little person and you could have, medical benefits from that, but you actually don't have dwarfism like in your genes. I wonder if that's the same for gigantism, where you could be legally, too tall to ride in a cab, but you don't actually have a pituitary gland issue that causes your body to keep growing and growing and growing and growing.
It's a really, really good way to distinguish the two, for sure. And I mean, Andre the Giant could have also died because his unofficial record is in one sitting, he drank 156 beers.
Fucking
which is
legend.
14.6 gallons in one sitting, which is awesome.
Just amazing. I mean, he used to order multiple chickens for dinner. That means like full chicken, eat like 3 or 4 of them. And then, a case of beer was like, that was like an appetizer. The guy would drink an entire case of beer and be like, what's up? I mean, he was a beast.
Yeah, if 156.
His lifestyle was not at all healthy, and he was a wrestler, so he was gonna die anyways. But he had so many health issues just because of his size, and
Yeah, you're gonna get blood to all those areas, and like it's a stress on the joints and the heart is really what kills them.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, exactly, and that has to do with modern giants. But
and weirdly enough, and you're gonna have to pull a picture up of this for everybody, is they think that the Cyclops was.
Can I guess?
Yes.
Does it have anything to do with Dumbo?
Weirdly enough, it does. Yes. So Joe is right. I had to look it up because I was like, there's no way. Elephant skeletons look like humans with one eye.
Mm-hmm.
So if you found that, besides the tusks, you'd be like, that's a gigantic human with a giant hole in its head that is not like from getting hit with a rock from a sling, for example.
Oh yeah, well there's no 2 holes in the middle. I was gonna bring that up later. I'm glad you brought that up.
They're kind of over like here somewhere, but it's
not
their
like,
eyes. You can fit eyes in them,
but
the giant hole up top. So that looks like a
I was gonna bring
Cyclops.
that because for years people would find elephant skulls or mammoth skulls and believe that it's the same. There's also a species of elephant that existed for million years or so that was called the dwarf elephant. So it was much smaller than the modern elephant, but it had the same structure. So you'd see like maybe like a 10, 11 foot tall skeleton when it has the head with the eye. You would think the eye missing. It's actually the trunk, but you wouldn't know that from the skeleton. And that seemed to be like an early indicator of like, oh, see, the story of the Cyclops is real. We're looking at Cyclops skull right here. That made me think of how many times that must have happened in history. People would have thought the same thing. Like for dinosaurs, you're seeing all those skeletons and thinking, well, that's their proof right there. Dragons existed. There's a dragon right here. Same thing with the Cyclops and the elephant skulls. It seemed to me. I don't blame them for thinking that. It does look like it, but you don't know any better.
It really does. I mean, if I came across that now in today's day, I would still go, holy shit. Dude, we found a Cyclops.
I might not do that today, but yeah. A couple thousand years ago, I for sure would.
I'd be so excited in the moment that I'd be like, dude, it's real, man. We got this. We found it all. It's a Cyclops, clearly.
That is the yin and the yang of this podcast.
That is the yin and the yang of the podcast. Is I get really excited off the bat. And then at the end, I have to try to disprove what I researched and what I was so excited about. So that brings us to the most conspiracy side of this entire podcast. That
Let's get into it.
We're gonna get into it.
They're real giants that really existed. We're not talking about elephant skulls or cyclopses or drinking contests in Asgard. We're talking about real life existed on Earth giants.
And I was going to open this podcast with simply say giants are real. Period. No question. I have zero doubts. That's how yesterday I felt.
Statement.
I'd be like, I don't even need to talk about them. It's so blatantly obvious that this is a real thing. I don't even have nothing to say.
Yeah. It's a known fact, but we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't dive in, though. Dive in and find out.
We got to dive in and find out. And the reason that we think that a lot of people had no doubt in their mind that these are real is, like I said, in the mid 2000s, there was this big thing online where people photoshopped almost every single picture of giant skeletons were disproved. And
yeah, early Photoshop probably tricked so many people. I mean, before the technology was so new, that there's just so many early internet things that looked like, this is real, whether it's like murder photos or, cryptozoology things like the chupacabra, all that stuff. It was so well done back then. But if you look at it now, it looks like a fucking joke because we know what Photoshop looks like now. But at the time, if you weren't making a Hollywood movie, you couldn't make something look like that. It just looked like a Polaroid. It was crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's crazy. It still can be very hard because like I'm currently looking at a picture of like a burial site in Montana, in a mining town with a picture there, and it's for me it's I'm not an expert, but the picture looks like it was taken in 1976.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. That Photoshop gets better too, and people get better at it. That's why you can't prove things exist just by looking at a picture of them. Unfortunately, you gotta be a little bit more scrupulous about your data.
And for what we know, so these giants that are, again, let's go over some features or some situations of these giants. So the ones that we're talking about specifically are related to Norse culture, which makes you think this might have been a thing. They were all over Norse culture. Like you said, these are
big part of it. Yeah,
big part of it. And the giants
think like how in Christianity they think of like demons and things being like just a natural part of what happens. That's what they thought too. It's like, oh yeah, there's giants. That just is.
Yeah, it just is. And one of the most compelling cases is Minnesota, where again you have giants in Norse culture, and they seem to be Minnesota. Yes, so
the Minnesota Giants. I mean, wait a minute. What is this?
No, not the Giants. The Minnesota Vikings. And
that's what I was trying to say. I was like, well, there's the New York Giants, Minnesota Vikings. Like, what did they match that up in between? The Minnesota Vikings. Yes.
Yeah. So the towns, a lot of towns in Minnesota. There's a gigantic population of people from that part of the world in Minnesota.
Yeah, big Scandinavian population there.
Scandinavian situation going on.
That does make sense why they would be called the Vikings. Whether it's still a cool name for your team either way. But
yeah, well, we know the Vikings were there, and there's some evidence that the Vikings came to Minnesota. Weirdly enough,
we know the Vikings were in Minnesota.
Minnesota.
This is news to me. Scandinavian descendants entering Minnesota in the year 1820 is not the same as them saying that Vikings were in Minnesota.
Want to know why?
I do want to know why.
Okay, all right. And this is before Christopher Columbus. This is before.
Well, yeah, we already talked about Leif Erikson, the year 900 or so, reaching the New World. But that was, Nova Scotia. It wasn't 1,000 miles deep into the continent.
Sure, but the channels of water that bring you to the Great Lakes are from the Atlantic Ocean, still the same area. So, I mean, roughly. So, interestingly enough, Minnesota, it's not just random. They didn't just get here and start walking. There's a lot of copper in Minnesota.
Not enough robbers.
What did the Vikings like? They liked bronze.
Having sex. Oh yeah, bronze.
Yes, and all that. It's all good. They liked bronze, and if there's a gigantic natural,
is there a vein of copper that exists in Minnesota? Perhaps?
Is that what you call it? I was thinking of like deposit, but vein could be a word too.
Yeah, deposit's it too, but yeah, you call it like a section, like a vein of gold or copper or whatever.
Yeah. So for their culture, yes, there is. So it's very clear, and based off of burial sites. Know what you're not going to use to find Native American burial sites? A metal detector.
Yes.
Close.
I said the wrong word. That's what I meant. Not a
minesweeper. I mean,
I thought of metal detector. And I was like, what is that? Yeah,
thing.
minesweeper.
Yeah. Oh,
no,
definitely
metal
minesweeper.
detector. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, but what if you use a minesweeper and it goes off on these ancient burial sites, it's likely Vikings because they're the one, besides naturally occurring metals that do happen and
because
cause
they would
false
have the
readings,
metals.
they have the
Buried with
metals.
them.
Yeah.
Gotcha. They have
So
the
and they had them
meat.
back. So they think that they came to America for the copper. So that brings us to the Native Americans who, so you have the Norse culture and their giants, then you have the Native Americans who also talk about giants a lot.
Right.
And the Native Americans would talk about giants not because they had giants within their population. It was because that the Vikings were basically already there, and those were the giants.
Oh, because
Yeah,
they
and
were
those
bigger.
giants, and in those stories that the Native Americans talked about or shared from word to mouth. What do you say?
Word of mouth.
Okay, they
mouth to mouth information.
Mouth to mouth.
I'm gonna give you mouth to mouth, baby.
I'm gonna talk into your mouth.
Yeah.
Those giants they talk about had red or yellow hair, were between, all right, I wrote this down wrong, but over 6 feet tall, double rows of teeth, 6 fingers, 6 toes, and they usually have arrow holes in their skulls. Those skulls they found usually have, like, they were killed with arrows.
Lightly colored hair, 2 rows of teeth, extra finger.
Extra finger, extra toe. Were quite tall. And so this is where people get crazy. So and this segues into everything. So in the US, there's a lot of these burial mounds, especially in the Midwest. And we can pull up some pictures of these things. Some of them look like landfills, some of them are enormous. I mean, when I say landfill, like a giant landfill, and some of them look like they're just burial mounds that are, you could fit a school bus under. I mean, they're not that big, but some of them are very big.
It's still pretty big. I mean, using a school bus as a measurement usually means it's pretty big anyway. So it's like, this is the tiny ones you can maybe do a school bus, but
yeah, true.
But the big ones you could do multiple school buses.
Oh yeah, like a real landfill. Like they're really, really big and they're unnatural.
Like a municipal landfill for like a city or something.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. And those, so there's no question that those are man-made. It just, in the history that we know of, they're made by the Native Americans. Totally could be true, but they could also, it's a lot of material to move as well. And then that's where a lot of the accounts of finding these large skeletons in the US, which I have some data on that. There's I'm trying to think of how many there are. There's thousands of them, and there's thousands of accounts of these burial mounds. There's a lot of them. And what makes them think that particularly these were the Norse people or the giants is the stonework that's associated with them usually. So in all these myths,
with the burial mounds, there's stonework around them.
Yeah. There's stonework around them. And some of those stones weigh, I think a modern day crane, the one I was able to research, can lift 18 tons for these stones. Hefty. That's pretty big. 18 tons is very, very large. I think your car, weighs 2 tons, if I'm right. A most average car, 18 tons is about what a modern day like skyscraper crane can lift. And some of those stones that they found were up to 20 tons. That's a pretty big thing to move.
Wow.
The Native Americans
that is insanely large to move. So is the idea maybe that a modern day crane cannot perform a task that a giant could? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Okay, exactly. Because I would think that, if a modern day crane can lift 18 tons and these stones are 5 tons, you'd be like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, people couldn't move those just with their bare hands. You need a modern day crane. But the claim is that they're even larger than what a modern day crane can carry. No,
yeah.
You're losing me. You're losing me a little bit. You ever seen a skyscraper? Those things are fucking huge.
Well, the crane isn't picking up the skyscraper. It's picking
up
no,
it is not. But it is
the
peak. It's peak technology for construction, right? They're going to build the crane that is the cheapest and the lightest. They can lift the most. And I can't imagine they build a crane that could lift less than a stone that people were lifting back then. But that indicates they lifted it at all.
20 tons is 20 tons. I don't know the make and model of the 18 tonner, but that's the one that I found.
I don't believe that the rocks are not 20 tons. I believe that a giant might not have been the one who moved them. That's all I'm saying.
It's possible.
I
It's
believe the
all
weight of the
possible.
rocks. I just don't think that maybe they were there. You know? The Earth can move that a lot easier than people could. But so now I'm getting confused. I'm getting my wires crossed. I don't mean to keep interrupting you unless you keep going. Because now I thought that the idea might be, okay, these are, Scandinavian and Nordic people coming in. And as a Native American, they would be on average, Scandinavian people were taller. They still are genetically on average taller than people with Native American DNA. So you'd think, well, classic mouth-to-mouth storytelling. You're going to exaggerate. They're larger. They have more teeth. They have extra finger. Like, you make them more like looking a monster. So I can hear that like, okay, that's what they were saying. The giants were these people. But then you're also saying that there must have been actual giants, because even a Scandinavian man like like the Mountain from Game of Thrones, the strongest man in the world at one point, even he can't lift a 20-ton boulder. So or are they the Vikings, or are there also giants the Vikings brought with them that they had to build a bigger boat for?
Giants the Vikings brought with them.
Okay.
We think. Okay. People excavated tons of bones throughout these times and gave them to the Smithsonian. So this is a trustworthy source. We found some crazy shit about human history.
Oh, you're going to talk about the guy who was the head of the Smithsonian at the time? Okay.
I don't have it. I do. Yeah. Cause it all relates to the only evidence that I have. So,
sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of it. I just remembered in my head. I'm like, the Smithsonian, which now is, and was then a super reputable source for, learning about science. It's the Museum of America. I mean, why wouldn't you trust them with this kind of crazy find? If we found giant bones today, I'm sure the Smithsonian would want to hear about it.
Exactly. So, so they first think that these thousands of giants they dug up, the Smithsonian and other people destroyed them all because it didn't align with manifest destiny. That's the first thing where they're like, well, hey, how can there be giants because there's no bones? And they say, well, they destroyed them all because it didn't align with their philosophy.
We're already getting wildly speculative on that.
That's what they're. I'm not saying that's what I'm saying. That's what
every single. That's every single one. Well, why can't we see that now? Well, it's easy because they don't want you to know the truth, man. I mean, come on. They destroyed every single one they had. That's very suspect because we still know about it, don't we? I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, and they stood on record apparently 17 cases, the Smithsonian uncovering giant skeletons over 7 feet tall, and there's no record of that of like those situations. The Smithsonian denies it, and you were going to bring up the current, at the time the I guess the president or the guy who ran the Smithsonian.
He was the head of the Smithsonian. Yeah, he was the in charge. And he was super, I don't have his name on hand just because when I was doing the research, I learned about him. But yeah, he was, a picture of the guy or woman who's head of the Smithsonian today, you'd be like, well, this person's obviously an expert when it comes to all kinds of science and history. Like you have to be well-versed and well-respected to get that position. This man was firmly in the camp that giants do exist. So not only was he being impartial about it, he was actively seeking out giants. He was like a giant loving guy. It was like his passion. It would be like if today, the guy who was the head of NASA was super into UFOs, which I'm sure that person's probably, interested in the idea. But if they made it their life's work to find UFOs, I mean, you get a lot more evidence coming in. Wouldn't necessarily be more or less credible, but that seemed to be what the idea was at the time. Was there's kind of like the craze going on in the newspapers and all finding new, new kinds of people. It was the same era of, learning new things about, there's freak shows going around. Just newspapers and information was going around more and more often. The idea that giant people were going around was like all the craze, which I think is a big reason why Abraham Lincoln was even talking about the idea of it. I mean, imagine it being that big of a deal. Imagine if we had a president of the United States today going and making statements based off of crazy, wild hearsay of a bunch of lunatics talking bullshit. Imagine what that would be like. Strange.
It's not like that anymore, apparently.
No. Oh, well, no. This is well
as of today.
Yeah, as a while ago. I'm just saying, imagine, It's strange.
Yeah, imagine. Yeah. Crazy. So, so that's what they'll all tell you is that that the Smithsonian might have 300 giants in the basement, or it's all been destroyed, or whatever it is, because that's the thing with these Nordic red-haired dual rows of teeth giants. But there's also the thing that compels me the most is a a book came out called the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants, and it's a 500 something page book.
That's a giant book.
Giant book.
Yeesh.
That this book is not really, it's not speculating, and it's also not telling too much of a story. It's a decent read, but what it is it pulls together collections of it has pulled through and sorted different periodicals and newspaper articles from the 19th and 20th century about giants. And
really,
so it's what the people, it's the history, it's, how do you word this, it is putting yourself in the shoes of the people at that time and reading what they would be reading in 1836, 1850, 1905.
that's
whatever
interesting, because that, even though it's probably usually a secondhand source like an interview or people writing about it, that still is like a primary source. I mean, that is what people were publishing at the time. That's much more to sink your teeth into than just mouth to mouth stories over a generation. I mean, actually being able to read the article, that's pretty cool.
Exactly. So these are primary sources. That's exactly what they are. And the cool thing is since it's newspapers, there's some small hand stories too about, like, I mean, literally, there's so many in here. There's thousands of accounts of people unearthing bones that they would measure to be 8 feet in length if they put it together.
The bones were 8 feet? Oh no, the skeleton was 8 feet.
Well, skeleton, yeah, sorry.
Okay,
Like a
That's
femur
crazy,
can be like 10% longer than anything they've ever found. Type of documents in here.
Yeah.
Not documents, but type of probably is pretty cool. So I was just skipping through and I was like, I wonder what's up with Massachusetts. And I wonder what's up with Providence, Rhode Island, where you are. And there's a really quick excerpt from Rhode Island. It says Providence County. It was called Burrillville as it was and as it is in 1856. It says a few years
that's
ago,
the sticks. That's like Belchertown or Amherst of Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, yeah, okay. So a few years ago, a discovery was made. This is in 1856. This is written. A few years ago, a discovery was made by one of our citizens, which reveals the physical character of those with whom our ancestors had to contend. In 1836, Captain Samuel White, in excavating beneath his woodhouse, found the remains of a human skeleton of proportions altogether unlike our modern inhabitants. He called several of his neighbors to view it, and among them was Dr. Levy Eddy. The body was lying upon the side with arms folded, head bent forward, and knees drawn upward. It was exhumed, the bodies were put together, and all parties were surprised at its gigantic height. So on and so forth. It gets into a couple things, and it says he must have been as much as 8 feet high.
Wow.
And there's thousands of those stories in here.
Just giant people.
Yeah, so the thing is, you can disprove a lot of the photos, a lot of the other things, but the periodicals that we're pulling from, that's a story. And then there's almost identical stories in Gloucester, Massachusetts, near me. There's pictures of artifacts they think belong to giants or whatever it is back in
giant
Salem,
toothbrushes. This brush is far too large for a normal person.
Giant Crocs, all the stuff that you'd find back then, But
giant bow tie. Well, no, that was just from a clown. That was a mistake.
Did you see the giant footprint in South Africa?
I saw a rock formation that looked like a footprint. Yeah, I did see that.
Okay, we're gonna pull that up, guys, so we can see it.
It's like a gander.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, part of my dive on this one. So usually what I go through the things that I already know about it, and I look those up to understand, learn again what they are. And then I started to dive into a little bit towards more of your territory about it. And I started to look into like, okay, what are the like out there theories about this that maybe, conventional wisdom isn't addressing, because I think it's worth looking into. But this one was particularly fun because I just typed in giants are real on YouTube and then went on a rabbit hole, and it was fucking awesome. I mean, it was hilarious. Going through all the comments and stuff, it was kind of depressing because of the amount of views and me understanding that these people aren't watching it for the same entertainment value that I am, and they're taking generalized information from them and taking it as fact. And they're the kind of people in general, not always, but the kind of mentality is the same thing as that, oh, well, it's because they destroyed all of it because it doesn't fit with their narrative, man. Okay, whatever, maybe they did. But yeah, so I saw a lot of these, and this one I saw in particular on a video, which was a guy who I think is kind of a self-professed like a giant archaeologist. He had a video of him finding this giant footprint, and he kind of reminds me of a ufologist, right? Because you dedicate your whole life to doing it, and lucky you found the stuff you're looking for. Isn't that fortunate for your career? So he found that, and they also found a what he called a petrified giant's shoulder blade, which looked to me to be a large slab of rock. But he was quick to show you that when you pour water on it, it looks wet. So it's a shoulder blade. I don't know. I wasn't convinced. Were you convinced of that? It does look like a foot, but that doesn't mean it's a foot. That's all I'm saying.
So I didn't see the shoulder blade. I think that's hilarious.
The shoulder blade's pretty good. Not as convincing. The foot's much more convincing looking.
The foot is very convincing looking for a couple of reasons.
Step one.
Looks like so I can tell you what it looks like. So it looks like somebody. So when you step into mud, the mud gets displaced in a certain fashion.
Yeah, it kind of rises up and curls around your foot as it goes up.
Yeah. I think about putting your foot in wet sand or mud.
That's
you really
a perfect analogy. Yeah, you'll be able to see the picture, but yeah.
Yeah, it does that. The weird thing about the foot is that two things. Is let's start with the most obvious. It's like this. The foot's right here. It's on the side of a rock.
Right. Yeah. So, it's not like a normal footprint you'd find would be facing the earth like towards down, but this one looks almost like you're on one of those recumbent bikes, like your feet are straight ahead, pushing up against it.
Yeah, and we know that giants didn't have those. So
we know for a fact giants did not have recumbent bikes. They only had unicycles because they're too dumb to think of two wheels. And also giants are dumb. I don't know if we said that yet. It's the classic, balancing out of your powers and abilities and mythical stuff. If you're a gigantic, you have all that strength, you can't be smart too. Giants are stupid. Okay.
They pick things up and they put them down.
They're not very intelligent, but they'll crush you and they'll eat your bones. Sorry.
Yep.
Anyways, more on with this.
So
is
the rock,
South African one.
The South African rock. Yeah. It's on its side, which again is not. There are dinosaur footprints like that too because of the way that the plates in the earth move rocks or whatever it is.
Not common, but it's not impossible to have a footprint. Horizontal.
Right. So the thing is a lot of those dinosaur footprints were genuinely like put into were
fossilized.
Yeah, they're fossilized in mud, and you can based on the type of rock it is, it's like it was actually mud. This is granite, which means it was lava. So you'd have to really stupid giant to step in lava and then have it harden immediately like that. I just feel like that's pretty crazy.
It would have to cool very fast to keep that shape, right? If someone just stepped in it. Yeah,
and like I've never stepped in lava, but I would barefoot, but it's not good. That's not good news.
No, you'd disintegrate your entire foot. Doesn't matter how big you are. If an elephant stepped in lava, it would disintegrate its whole foot. That's just the nature of the beast. But that is, can you imagine how bad that must have smelled? Big giant foot roasting.
Yeah, just like burnt hair. Which is kind of what burnt flesh smells like. And
they don't wear shoes either because look at the footprint.
Because look at the footprint. No shoes. Clearly, no shoes at all. So
stinky old dirty giant feet.
Yeah. So that's the thing. If it was like a different type of rock or whatever it is, you could say, well, it was clearly mud or whatever it is. It's granite. So according to everybody, that's lava. If it's in its liquid form, it's lava. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of rough, and why is there only one, the whole big thing. But so that's an interesting one. And what do I think? I mean, it looks so much like a foot. But it could also just be a rock formation. There's really no way of knowing. It's interesting. If I was there, I'd love to go see it. It'd be fun.
I would like to see it in person too.
I don't know. What do you think it is? 4 or 5 feet tall? I think 5, maybe.
I think it's 1 foot tall. One very large.
It is 1 foot tall.
It looks like it's almost the size of the guy when he's showing you it. I mean, we'll see in the picture, but he's almost as tall as it looks huge.
Yeah. I think it's
very convincing. I mean, if I was a little kid looking for, giants in the woods and I saw that, I would be fully convinced that I found a giant foot. And that man has that mentality right now. I'm very proud of him.
This is from the Newton Daily Republican of Newton, Kansas, about a story that came from Connecticut in 1897 about workers digging under a church and finding a petrified giant 8 feet in height and built in proportion. And they think it was at least 150 years old, blah, blah, blah. It's 600 pages of this book are just stories like this, and they have measurements. They have, like, we brought a doctor out, we brought a mortician out, or whatever the
Yeah,
funeral
that is
people are.
compelling. That amount of information, even if it's not 100% accurate, just the sheer amount of it, it's definitely compelling.
Yeah,
to me.
and the thing is, there's just the sheer amount is correct. I mean, again, thousands of these stories about it. Just
not a one-off.
You're just reading the words about the thigh bone is the femur is twice the size of the ordinary man.
It's wild.
It's really, really interesting, and it's in there everywhere. So that's something. So for me, the evidence of all the other people telling me the Smithsonian's hiding things, could it be true? Yeah, totally. But could it not be true? Yeah, definitely too. But these giants seem to all have something in common, and it's that Nordic thing going on.
That is that big Nordic horn they're wielding all the time. If you know what I mean.
And one really important thing too is, like I said, statistically, you get tall people. You get really tall people. 3 per million is what seems to be the going rate for really tall people. And there's 8 billion people in the world?
7 billion almost.
7 billion almost in the world. So you can do the math and figure out whatever that is. And how many quite a few really tall people. But the interesting things about these burial mounds that they're talking about is, it's one thing, yeah, you're going to dig up really, really tall people. That's going to happen. But why are there 8 of them together? That's the part that's weird. So it's like, there are tall people, there are gigantism, which is an actual disease. And then there's, mythology that brings things together. And then there's an actual race of giants. And that's what they're trying to prove by the fact that there's 4 of them. Because you might have, I might have 5 kids and all of them are 5'8", and then there's one of them that's fucking 8 feet tall. That's gigantism. So why are there 5 of them buried together? That's the thing that gives it some sort of
credence.
Okay, interesting. Yep. And they're all in these mounds, and they all have like sacrificial burial type situations. There are, and
perhaps they were giant burial mounds of slain giants, much like piling up the bodies of your enemies.
Yeah, well, that would even give it. Well, exactly.
Maybe they weren't a family. Maybe they were like, hey, we killed all these giants, and now we'll bury them all together. But we respect the giants because they're a worthy adversary.
Yeah, but that still gives it some, that still is supporting evidence to that. Like, if they're being all put in one place, that gives it some sort of.
Oh yeah, I mean, if that is a slain giant burial mound, it definitely gives evidence that they're a giant.
Right.
That's what you mean.
Yes,
yeah, it does add to the idea that there might be giants when they're piling up a giant killing trophy burial mound. There's giants,
Yeah, we think they were giants and had something to do with each other.
So I wanted to tap into 1 or 2 more of the modern day examples that I found out with, and then I want to round it out a little bit with the idea that tapped into what you said, is that 1 in every 3 million people will be a very large person. So I thought you were going to
3 in every 1 million.
I'm sorry, 3 in every 1 million. So much more. Really, though, it is many. It's more than double.
Actually, yeah.
So I thought you were going to bring this up for sure. I can't believe you didn't bring it up, especially when you brought up the idea of the giant having multiple fingers and 2 rows of teeth. Is the giant of Kandahar? Did you not hear about this thing at all? This is the biggest conspiracy one I found. I saw the most videos on it, and they love it because it ties
Kandahar.
It ties into giants. It ties in modern times, so it's like it happened recently, and then it ties in the United States government hiding it because it goes against what we understand about real life, man, and they want to hide the truth from you because, just because it's not the way things are. That always seems strange to me that they would want to hide things just because they're different. If you want to hide things because it's ruining the order of shit, I understand that. You can't tell people you're spying on them. That'll ruin it. Government hides that. If you tell them giants exist, I don't see how that dismantles the CIA. It's always weird to me that would be like, that's to say they have to hide it. Like, why wouldn't they just tell people? It's crazy. I mean, they get more credence to the idea that they know this shit.
That's
not
a good
important.
Point. Well, no, it is important. I mean,
that's what I always think of. I'm like, why? Like they always say they don't want you to know. It'll upset the established order. They're not the Catholic Church in 1300. You can introduce new information and still have a chokehold on the planet.
And just because giants are real, it doesn't really
doesn't change anything.
Evolution at all, actually.
No, and if anything, it actually takes away from your credibility because you're hiding plain facts that are amazing. Like I don't see why the benefit would be to hide that information. Obviously, like I can see the aliens thing because there's so much more technologically advanced that could do it. But the idea of hiding like fossils and stuff is there's no every time people are going to bring up conspiracy, I'll listen if it's like, what's in it for them? If they can't even tell me what's in it for the people hiding it, then it's impossible to comprehend they would hide it, because it's so difficult to hide these things. And if they have no benefit to it besides, well, it's just not the way things are supposed to go, they want to maintain power, it'll never be enough for me. You have to have either financial incentive, status incentive. There has to be a reason why people do this shit, or safety. And hiding giant skeletons is not a matter of national security. So I don't know why they would fucking hide them, especially not just hide them, but destroy the evidence of 3,000 of them. It seems completely absurd to me. Never before been done on record, maybe done many times off record. I don't know, but just wacky that would happen. So the Giant of Kandahar. The Giant of Kandahar is a story that happens in 2002 in Afghanistan. Our historians of the podcast will know that 1 year before that, something happened that sent a lot of military to Afghanistan quickly following that event. So America invades Afghanistan after 9/11. We got soldiers all over there. Kandahar is one of the cities in Afghanistan. And there is a story, and it goes a lot like the story about how they hid the skeletons, of a group of special forces. Now, I looked at a couple of sources. I couldn't figure out what branch of special forces they were, but bear with me.
I love how in these stories, the special forces are always involved. Like in the UFO cover up in Antarctica, like Navy SEAL was in Antarctica. Came across
forces.
Navy SEAL in Antarctica, comes across UFO, is a whistleblower. It's like, why?
It just makes it cooler, right?
It just makes
if it's just a regular guy,
like,
it's like, but this guy's just special forces,
Yeah, the special forces, trained observers, came across a giant. Anyways, go on.
So they didn't, out of the multiple videos I saw, they didn't actually specify what special forces branch it was. I'm guessing it'd be the Rangers or something if you're in the middle of Kandahar. Don't know. So anyways, a group comes upon, doing their usual patrols out in the boonies. They come upon a cave, and as they're investigating it, because, a lot of times people were actually residing in caves in Afghanistan as a shelter, especially people who were, part of the,
running
Taliban, or people who want to not be hanging out in a city, they do it. So they check out the cave, and upon checking out this cave, they find a man who has red hair, and he is 12 feet tall and weighs 1,100 pounds. What? So not even close to a size of one of those bricks or a sea dragon, but pretty big for a human. 1,100 pounds. I mean, that's my 1,100 pound life. 12 feet tall. And he was wielding a spear, and he had red hair. So imagine a giant ginger wielding a spear in Afghanistan. And this is where the story gets good, though. He goes on to impale one of the special forces guys with his spear. It's already doing better than anyone else would do with the spear. Go ahead, go into Kandahar right now with a spear and see how many special forces you can kill with that thing. I'd say less than 0 might be my number. But he is 12 feet tall. Who knows? After a 30-second firefight, which is a long time for a firefight with one person, especially when everyone fully outfitted with assault rifles. That's a while for a firefight, especially when only one person has a spear and everyone else has guns. They kill him. They kill this giant person. And of course, they're not stupid, right? This is a big deal. This is obviously isn't one of the members of the Mujahideen. This is a giant. We got to tell our CEO. So they tell the higher ups, and they tell them to keep on the hush hush. This is going to shake the nature of what we understand about people. There's a giant living in Afghanistan. So they decide to bring the body back to America for scientific purposes. They have to employ a large aircraft, which we spoke about briefly earlier. This one happens to be a C-130, but I mean, it's a giant. You can't just put the guy in a JetBlue flight. Also, he's a corpse now. So they brought him on the plane. I guess they weighed him beforehand. That's how they know how much he weighed. 12 feet, 1,100 pounds rather. And they said that he smelled very badly. The dead body of the giant did, which I love. That's also a funny thing. It's like, oh, he smelled terrible. Like he didn't shower. Also, he's a corpse. That's going to smell pretty bad either way. And they said he smelled like a corpse, which I thought was a good little indicator of the dead body.
It's probably
like
real then.
Yep. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think you know where this is going. I mean, it never landed. You know what I'm saying? Like it's been a black operation ever since. So there's no record of them ever studying it. And for all intents and purposes, it was brought back to America, and those men were told never to talk about this again, and they swept it all under the rug. So that giant of Kandahar is probably in Davy Jones' locker right next to Osama bin Laden's body. Or they threw him in the ocean so they'd hide him from us. So, I mean, I mean, you believe what you want to believe, but I mean, these are special forces guys, and one of them told the story, and he was there apparently in 2002, which I imagine he's probably in his 40s by now because that was a while ago.
Wonder if we can get him on the pod.
He was on a major radio show. That's why I know about this. And that's why everyone else did all the crazy YouTube videos about it. But, I had fun telling the story, but I mean, even if some of it is true about something happening in Afghanistan, it's just such bullshit. Oh yeah. Also, he had 2 rows of teeth. He had 6 fingers, very much like the story that you told happening in the 1800s. The same exact thing for this guy. I forgot to mention that too. Besides him being huge, he had the 2 rows of teeth. A lot of these giant stories have the 6 fingers, 2 rows of teeth, which also leads me to believe that it might be perhaps fabricated a little bit if you're doing stories from 150 years ago. And whenever you're taking up with an idea that fit the narrative you already have, it kind of seems made up because it's just too close to be true. Why doesn't he have 7 fingers? Why doesn't he have 1 row of teeth? It's like maybe it just worked out that way, but it seems a little suspect for me. I do have the closest I could find them because I do feel a little bit beholden when I'm being the skeptic all the time to find, well, be honest and try to find the closest you can to what it actually would be. Don't just be a contrarian. It's too easy. It's too much fun. So I did find one that was the closest I could find, and it's in Namibia. You know where Namibia is?
That is in the middle of Africa, just a little bit north of Rwanda.
That's exactly right. I actually didn't know where it was. I knew it was in Africa, but I did have to look up where it was. That is where it is.
I pulled that right out of my ass.
It's perfect.
It could be.
I don't think it's next to Rwanda, but it is in Africa.
I said just north into the left, just a little bit north of Rwanda, and it's called Namibia.
Yeah, we'll pull up the map for the folks. I mean, I looked it up earlier. I couldn't tell you exactly where it is, but I do believe it's in Central Africa, right?
Oh, I'm way wrong. It is literally touching South Africa.
Oh, so it's in South Africa. I thought it was more towards like the center of it. Okay.
Yeah, so, it's directly west of Botswana and directly northwest of South Africa.
Gotcha. So that kind of does tie us together a little bit with our footprint from earlier that was in South Africa, I imagine, right? It
does. It's all coming together now.
It's all
coming together. Can you believe this?
See, that's all evidence I need. Two points that are coincidentally in the same conversation.
3,000 miles away from that footprint, we found more giants.
Beautiful. Fucking beautiful. So they found a femur bone there not too long ago, and it's in a mine in Namibia called the Berg Aukus mine. And so the femur bone is larger than any, modern human's bone is. And because of, archaeology and the study of, skeletal structures, that's how we know that in general, most humans today, because of our genetics and because of our, enhanced nutrition, and we're much more healthy and stable and growing than people were back then, that it's much larger than even a modern human would be today, which is strange. It's dated to be around the earliest times of humans existing. So around the same time as Neanderthals as well. So we're talking like the earliest times. We talk about like pre-ancient history, like modern, when humans became what we know as humans.
For reference, still cigarettes, not the jewel yet, hence the health problems.
Exactly right.
Yeah, we're healthier now because we have the jewel. Back then, they're still smoking tobacco.
Exactly. They're still smoking the wacky tobacco. So the guy that I saw research it, he's an expert on skeleton structures, and he writes papers basically based on like finding things like this. And for what he decided, and a lot of people are kind of saying that it doesn't seem like it's much more evidence than just the femur, but it was pretty convincing, the idea that it was either a very skinny and weirdly shaped Neanderthal for it to be this large of a bone, because even though they were shorter than humans, they were much stockier. So their leg bones were actually larger than ours, even though they were shorter, because of just the sheer size of them. Their proportions were different than us. So that works to how you can build your body up. So if it was actually human bone, it would put them, I think, well over 8 feet tall, if that was that. So that actual evidence dated to the correct time of a femur that was for a person that must have been, if they were human and not, a Neanderthal that we don't understand its structure, it would be someone who's a giant. In other words, it's an 8 foot tall person in times before people were even, able to grow beyond 5 foot. Most people were below 5'8" at the time. So it would have been a real giant, and they have the information there. But that does seem to be more tied into what you said before. It's 3 in a million. And I think that ultimately, when it comes to giants being found, I think that is more of the story. It comes from the word of mouth of seeing something big and imagining it bigger. And it comes from the real genetic condition of gigantism. There must have been thousands and thousands of people over the years in ancient China, Mesopotamia, Japan, whatever, who had gigantism, and their pituitary gland is formed in such a way where it never stops giving you human growth hormone and all the hormones you need to keep your body expanding and growing. That's supposed to shut down after puberty and settle in. But their bodies, the way that they're born, they never shut that down. So they keep growing and growing and growing perpetually. And that's why most people who have gigantism don't make it past the age of 40, because even if you're as healthy as can be, your body is outgrowing itself. The human body is not built to carry on that much weight, that much structure. Like you said before, even just the blood flow, nerve endings, the taller you get disproportionately to your body, it just doesn't work out anymore, which brought me to other people with gigantism in the modern age. And I figured, well, if this person existed in the year 1000, they would be a giant. They're only 2 feet taller than the tallest person you know, but that's still the biggest person you could imagine. And I can see that most people would say that is a giant. I've seen a giant. They don't have to be 12 feet tall and lift a boulder for me to say that person was a giant. And the most exciting thing you saw all day was when your sheep threw up. And somebody that's 8 feet tall, you're not going to forget that. When you tell people about it, you're not going to say he was 8 feet tall. You're going to say he was a giant, and I don't have a ruler because it hasn't been invented yet. He was gigantic. He could have ate my head. He must have been 30 roosters tall, you know? Like, I can definitely see people saying that's what a giant is. Which made me think of, who's the tallest person to ever have lived that we know about? Did you ever hear about this guy?
There are Robert Wadlow, that guy.
Exactly right. Yeah, Robert Wadlow.
He's pretty fucking huge. Just for reference, when I worked at Target, was the worst 8 months of my whole life. I remember nothing. What happens when you're in trauma mode.
Hard
Hated
lines.
it. God, I fucking hate Target. Joe worked there too.
First job.
Shaq came in.
Oh, this is when he lived in Stowe, right? Because I think when he was on the Celtics, he lived in Sudbury. Yeah, he lived in Massachusetts for a while. I know that. Yeah. Someone I knew saw him at the Wayside Inn with him and his girlfriend at the time, which was
like
the
5
chick.
foot nothing. Yeah,
it was the chick who had won the reality show Flavor of Love when she got a chance to date Flava Flav from Public Enemy. She had won that. They broke up with Flava Flav and she started dating Shaq.
Yeah, he came in and bought towels, and he was.
So you saw him actually in person.
I was 1 foot from him. He went to the register next to me.
You're 1 foot from him.
Oh, yeah. There's a picture. The picture of me like that I saw. Like I'm checking out somebody else while he's like, you can see the back of me because he was.
If I was you, I'd be checking Shaq out the whole time.
I did check Shaq out the whole time. It was amazing. But you also didn't want.
You mean it's checking out in a retail sense?
Yeah, I know, but you didn't want to like be like, and he's just trying to live his life, trying to buy towels, But he was so goddamn. Unless you see someone that tall, like in real life, not like on the court,
Yeah.
Like he's in the aisle that everyone else is in. He's taller than the aisles. Like
you can see over all the shelves.
You can see over everything. I was like, holy shit! Like it's terrifying how tall he was. I was like, wow. And he's what, 7'1"?
I think he's 7'6" or maybe 7'3", something like that. He's over 7 feet tall, but not by much.
He was very tall, and it was amazing. It was like, what? So.
And that's you as a modern human who even knows who Shaquille O'Neal is. And you're still blown away by that discrepancy, by how much bigger he is. I just imagine that's gone over generations of humans. And the whole part of giant lore is just seeing people this big. It's the same as seeing someone who's has any genetic condition. You might call them all kinds of names in the past because you don't understand what they are, whether they're possessed or they're cursed or whatever. It ties all in. And then we look back at it now and we go, oh, see, that guy was cursed. He had, the devil's hand or something. You go, well, no, the person had a genetic condition. Now we call it that, but we know better now. It's strange to tie that together to be some kind of magical thing when we know better than that.
And even for me, though, like before you carry on, like, if I were to describe my experience, I'd be like, that's a 10-foot tall person. Like, I'm 100% sure. Like, I know better to say that, but in my mind, I go 10 feet. Like, he was taller than the aisles. Like, and especially imagine if I was my sister, who's a 5'1", she'd be like 30 feet.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a kid, you'd be like, that's an actual giant.
Especially a kid. Yeah, you're like, that is a C5 super galaxy, you know, like that's as big as that. Clearly,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
no question. Like
easily 300,000 pounds for sure.
yeah, easily, no problem. So, yeah, go back on Robert Wadlow.
Yeah, so Robert Wadlow, so he was the tallest man that we know of on record that there have been measured, and he had the same condition, gigantism. He was from America, and there's actually a man who lives in the modern day. I don't know if he's passed away, unfortunately, but within the last couple of years, he lives in Ukraine who has the same condition, who is currently the tallest man in the world. But this man, uh, he was alive a while back in the early 1900s into the mid 1900s. So there's pictures of him. You can see photos of him. He's not that long ago. But this man was 8 foot tall and 11 inches, so nearly 9 feet tall. So you know, in the all the articles, they just probably just wrote 9 feet, right? Because I mean, come on, 8, 11, you're basically there. So he's 8 foot 11, and he weighed 439 pounds, which is pretty heavy for a person. I mean, that's like the biggest lineman in the NFL probably weigh, close to 400 pounds. And this guy was 439 pounds. But like you said earlier about the skeletons, skinny guy, just gigantically tall. If you're that big, you're just going to weigh more just because of the amount of your body that's there. And there's all kinds of, I'll throw a picture up of him. There's pictures of him just like head and shoulders literally above everybody. Not just, oh, he's so much taller. Like, I mean, he could just, put people next to him. He looks like a giant because he is a giant. And unfortunately, because of all the things we talked about earlier, where the human body is not built to do that. And he had a pituitary gland issue. HGH is pumping through his veins every day. He keeps growing. He unfortunately died at the age of 22. Which is so young, and he was just this massive dude. I mean, if he could have kept living, he would have been over 10 feet tall if he kept growing at that pace, if you could keep him alive, just because his body wouldn't stop. By the age of 9 years old, I believe he was over 6 feet tall. So, I mean, I can't imagine being that large as a kid. So good for his mom. When he came out of the womb, he wasn't very large at all. He was a baby size. It's the problem that once you light the spark, you keep growing and growing and growing. You never get any smaller. And I got to put a picture of his shoes up too, because it looks like they have it next to a regular shoe, and it looks like a shoe and a chair. This big leather giant fucking thing. Looks like an actual chair. So this man was huge. Unfortunately, he must have had a host of health issues from, blood pressure, I'd imagine, was a nightmare. He probably got dizzy just standing up from the amount of time. And but he unfortunately died of getting infected in his left ankle. But I'd imagine that was just kind of heaping on the last scoop of ice cream to this litany of medical problems this poor guy had, especially in the mid 1900s and before that. It's just tough. It's even tough now. The guy who lived in Ukraine, who I don't know if he's dead or not, but he was, I think he was 19 or 20 when I last saw the videos about him. And yeah, he was having a difficult time surviving. Like every day you wake up, your feet are aching, you barely can live. You're crouching over all the time to live your life. And it's just it's a rough condition, but I tend to think that that's what's happened in history. And even though that he is 8 foot 11, so the tallest person that's ever existed on record. And we do have the benefit of modern, supplements and, food health and things like that make you be able to grow bigger and stronger and drink your milk and all that. I think it's definitely possible people could have existed over 8 feet for thousands of years, and they would probably be an amazing story. And if you found their skeletons, it'd be something else. I don't think it's out of the question at all that that's been happening forever, because the condition he had is not contingent on the time period that he lived in. If your pituitary gland has that same issue, you will grow to that size as long as you don't die. And I think because of modern medicine, he probably lived to 22. He might have died in his teens, but I don't think it's out of the question that could have existed all the time. And that, as we head into our conclusion here, is seems to be my taste on what giants are. Besides just a very cool, fun concept to talk about, I think that the reality of giants in the world has something to do with, like everything we talk about, it has to do with humanity and the human brain and how we perceive things.
Yeah, and a lot of the cover up of say that this is the case for these red-haired people or whatever the giants are in history.
Easy governor.
As a lot of things we talk about, it was stigmatized by Christianity in some way, shape, or form that this is not acceptable or they're the devil or whatever it is. So if you find them in the basement in a bunch of different places around the world in the 1800s,
yeah,
it might be because of similar things like the witch hunts. They go, okay, giants in the Bible, they were the devils. We can't be having them. So if they're walking around, people go, "Oh my God, this is terrible," and it's just some nice fucking guy who did not choose to be this tall. You
Yeah.
know,
The
yeah.
nicknames
There's a
for
lot of
Robert were the gentle giant and the young giant. Everyone thought he was the nicest guy. He's just trying to live his life.
yeah, exactly. He's not he understands it's crazy, but crazy tall, but it's he's just like everyone else.
Yeah.
That's nuts. It's really something.
But
But
yeah, so
but
I mean, so what do you think as far as what was your conclusion on giants? Because I have kind of a thought in my head about why the giants have existed in all these different cultures, and where I was so fascinated with the idea of it, beyond just what we talked about with people being born that way.
yeah. So the real question I think is is there a separate race of giants? I think that's the really tough question we're trying to ask ourselves.
Interesting.
Um,
So let me know about that.
yeah, I think that's because like it's very obvious. People again, 3 per million is the going rate for people who are tall like that. We know
Yeah.
that's a thing, but is there a race of people who is not a disability? Like these people are almost better
Yeah,
off,
like in their genetic
stronger.
code, they're built to be that large. It's not an
Yeah, like if they
anomaly.
have children, they're going to be tall too, like that type
Sure.
of
Yeah,
thing.
like thinking about a
That's
Neanderthal being shorter than us versus a Homo sapien, we're going to be taller
mhm.
on average. Our whole entire species is taller. So is
Yep.
there a species of humanoids that are just naturally taller altogether?
Yeah, we're talking the ones that are the conspiracies, this extra appendages mixed with the dual rows of teeth, the red hair, that type of
Yeah.
stuff. Is that a thing? I mean, my inkling tells me yes because of the periodicals collections.
Yeah.
Um, Something's up with that. I mean, it's too weird, and that's what I think. And then also, anytime you go before like pre-Bible stuff, that's where all the history is that it's really hard to identify. We think the pyramids were built this time, but do we know that? No. So I would say I'm pretty convinced, but I think that this is not as wildly popular as a topic as a lot of the other conspiracies out there, but there's also a lot of evidence that this could be something.
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
something to it. I think that there's something to this. Um, Again, I firmly believe there's something to aliens too, but like this one too, there's the only thing against there's a lot of things against it, but one of them is that nobody can produce any of these bones right now, from what I've
Always
read.
the hitch, right? You don't have the evidence,
The
or you do
evidence.
have it, but we just can't show you right now
Mhm.
because X reason or Y reason or
Yeah,
whatever.
so we'll give this one some time, see where this develops over the years. But yeah, I want to finish this book and see what's up with that. But it's very interesting because it's why is there so many accounts of this in newspapers from the 1900s? Like it's
Yeah, it is
a
undeniably
little
interesting.
something.
That
There's
many,
a lot
yeah,
of
for
them,
sure.
yeah, and they're from. It's I mean, like literally, they're in the Boston Globe. Reputable sources. Nothing really to gain from that. Like it's not a breaking story. It's weird.
So
It's
there's
weird.
something to gain from it. It's pretty interesting to put in the paper.
Yeah. So that's all I've got on Giants, and
Yeah, no, that's interesting for sure. I think I'm obviously, as usual, I am much less convinced than you are. But the amount of stories, like you said, and also just the things like that, fossilized femur and things like that, not fossilized, just the found femur. It does convince me more that like there is could very well be these stories are true about people who are larger than normal. Um, Unlike some things we talk about that I throw them out entirely. I go, there's no evidence for it. I wish there was. There isn't. There is evidence, to some degree that this could be a possibility. But like most of what we talk about, it does lose me when you tip over the scales to things like, and all the evidence is hidden, or there's a separate race of people. Like, I don't think it necessarily needs to be a separate race of people. I mean, I can produce, like I said, we can find a skeleton that large right now, and I can tell you it's a different race, but really it's the same exact race as you. And if you checked your DNA, it would be so close, you'd have to have a forensic scientist be able to tell you apart. You'd be identical. This man is 8'11", and he would have the DNA that looks exactly the same as yours. That
mhm.
person. So if there's a person who's 9 feet tall, we find their bones, I don't have any reason to believe that they have to be a separate race than me. He could very well
Mm.
be the same issue as this person had. We have tangible evidence for him. We have pictures of him. We have, data that they were watching him since he was a child. He was crazy. So I think it has more to do with that. And I think that the giants, in the sense of that, do exist, and they have existed for a long time, and they've fascinated people. But I think that ties more into our idea of giants as a concept. And that's why it existed on each part of the world altogether. I don't think that all the stories of giants have to do with the finding of these 8-foot tall people who maybe had gigantism or maybe seemed larger perhaps than they were. Like Goliath, I'd imagine, was probably maybe a 6-foot tall man who weighed 200 pounds. In the Philistine army at that time, that dude was a fucking giant. You probably would have been the biggest person you ever saw in your life. And he probably was the same size as an NBA point guard. But at the time, and you're David, you're 5'1", you weigh nothing. This man's a giant. I'd imagine that's most of what the story is. But why giants? Why does every single culture have it? I mean, you know, every culture has their own unique kind of weird mythological things that aren't always existing. But giants seem to be pretty ubiquitous. I think it does have to do with that innate fear that all humans have in us. It's built in. The same fear is built into all animals that are prey, and that's to be consumed. Your fear of being eaten alive and being hunted down. I know it sounds wild, but that's why people report all around the world having dreams about drowning or suffocating and being eaten, being chased by monsters, the things that go bump in the night, the boogeyman, the thing your people can't protect you against, the wolves in the woods when it's dark out, the howl of the woods, you know, the saber-toothed tiger coming to get you. It's built into us. And the people who didn't think that way are all dead and they never got laid anyways. So the DNA is not going on. You're dead. The people who are living now for a million years, you know, from early apes, we understand that you should be afraid of being consumed and attacked and eaten alive. And that is inherently a big part of giants for us. It's bigger than you, it's stronger than you, and it wants to kill you. And that's just such an innate fear of people. If you combine that in with the idea of growing up, I mean, when are you the most afraid of being eaten by a monster? For me, it was when I was a kid. Everyone in the world is a human that you know. They're all bigger than you. They're stronger than you. And it instills this idea of fear in them. You respect them. Most people are your family. You love them. But you just know that there's people that exist that are much bigger than you. Not like the fact that I'm different height than someone else. Like you're a child, someone who's 6 feet tall is a giant to you. And I think that innate feeling of being small and, you know, understanding the world is like a scary place, combined with the fact that we're prey animals and we have a fear of being consumed. I think that's a big reason why giants catch on so much around the world, no matter where you are, is that we all have this idea that there's a big, you know, man or woman, a giant monster who's going to get me and they're going to eat me. And it's just an innate fear. That's my thought on giants, just to wrap things up.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. I wouldn't think it's too different now. You just made me think like, you know, playing basketball and being 5'8" and being in someone who's 6'5". It's like that person can destroy you. Then imagine me versus Shaq in a fight. I'd be like, yeah.
Not even in basketball, Shaq could destroy you. Imagine him being like, I'm going to try to eat you.
Or like we're going to get in a fist fight. I'd be like, yeah, I got to find another method to get to win this one. Like I can't just traditionally
you gotta get creative. Yeah, you're gonna have to get creative.
Yeah, it's like that's a giant.
And if you're huge, you stick out.
Yep.
People notice.
They notice and they're scared of you. And again, like you said, if you're just used to just your goats, then you see that happen. And someone is, you know, 7-8 feet tall, you're like, that's a new person. That's a giant, something else.
For sure.
Well, that's all I got, Joe.
That's all I got too. I mean, like you said, like everything else, we'll keep our ears open and see if there's any new evidence coming out about it. But that's giants. I thought it'd be a fun topic for this week. I think is this our 10th episode?
This is our 10th episode.
Pretty good. A little decade. Number 10.
Yeah.
Short milestone for us.
This is an awesome 10th episode. Yeah, thanks for sticking with us, guys. We're happy to have our 10th and stay posted next week, and always keep us in the loop for what you want to hear from us too, because we always look for ideas.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. Like and subscribe and tell a friend.
That's the Dylan Joe podcast, guys. See you next week. There's a lot of copper in Minnesota.
Not enough robbers.
What did...
Giant toothbrushes. This brush is far too large for a normal person.
Giant Crocs, all the stuff that you find back then, you know. But
giant bow tie. Well, no, that was just from a clown. That was a mistake.
Where am I going with this? Can I guess?
Sure, you can guess again.
I can't think of anyone else.
Yeah. Why did you ask to guess? You had something loaded up.
It's giants that were over 8 feet tall. That's where I get crazy. Like,
I mean,
Did you
30
fart?
feet. Yeah, I did.
that was loud.